Cambridge police acted stupidly. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
White police officer in Cambridge gets a call from a neighbor in the neighborhood who sees this guy push open the door in the neighborhood. Didn't recognize him as Henry Louis Skip Gates, who's a Harvard professor, whose house it was. Didn't recognize him. She called 911. Don't you want your neighbors to do that? Looking out for you? Cop shows up, sees this man in the house, doesn't know if he belongs to the house, and says, "Sir, please come out and show ID." And what did this guy do, who, by the way, is a friend of Obama? "I'll come out if your mama tells me to come out." So the cop arrested him briefly. And instead of Obama saying, "You know, last night I talked to my friend Henry Louis Skip Gates," I said, "Skip, what are you doing? You're a Harvard tenured professor, for crying out loud."
Yeah.
The big problem in America with these young black men is they're not complying. And instead of complying with a perfectly reasonable, lawful order, you copped an attitude. That's what Obama should have said. What did he say? The Cambridge police acted stupidly. And it ticked off police officers all over America, and that set the foundation for his criticizing the police time and time again unfairly. Then there was, "If I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon," referring to Trayvon Martin. Okay, Trayvon Martin was shot and killed by a guy named George Zimmerman. Zimmerman stood trial for second-degree homicide. The jury found him not guilty. And those jurors who spoke to the media afterwards said, race had nothing whatever to do with it. Yeah. That's what started, by the way, Black Lives Matter. People think George Floyd started it. It didn't. That's what started it. So Black Lives Matter got started over a premise, and George Zimmerman wasn't even black. First they said he was white, then he turns out he was Hispanic and Cuban or whatever it was.
A mess.
Wasn't even, he was Mongol like most of us, mongrel like most of us, and he wasn't even white. That's what started Black Lives Matter. Then Obama said in an interview, racism is in America's DNA. The same guy who said we were 90% of the way there now says racism is in our DNA. His AG, Eric Holder, said, when it comes to matters of race, America has, quote, been a nation of cowards, close quote.
Amazing.
And Eric Holder gave a speech where he talked about America's continued pernicious racism, his term, not mine. Yeah. And one example he gave was voter ID. Most blacks support voter ID. He had Al Sharpton over the White House over 70 times. Al Sharpton is America's preeminent race card hustler who became famous falsely accusing a white man of raping Tawana Brawley. He was in the middle of the Crown Heights riots in 1991, where he said, if the Jews want to get their yarmulkes on, come to my house, let's get it on. And one Jewish leader referred to the Crown Heights riots of 1991 as the most serious pogrom in the history of America, and Al Sharpton was right in the middle of stirring the pot. I can go on and on about the many things he's done. So Obama had him over the White House over 70 or 80 times. And at the end of his term, because of all this narrative about how bad the police are, a black man got a gun and murdered two officers sitting in their squad car in New York, execution style, just popped them. Another black man in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, walks up to 3 officers, kills them execution style. Another black man in Dallas, Texas, execution style murders 5 officers. All these 3 black men either told people or posted on social media. The reason they did it is because of this notion, this narrative that Obama pushed, that the police are systemically racist against black people. And the data shows that anything, the police are more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. They kill more unarmed white people every year. They kill more whites every year than they kill blacks. It is a lie. And it's a direct line between Obama, Jesse, and what happened beginning in May of 2020 when we had 4 months of protests over the death of George Floyd. Keep in mind regarding that, there were 25 people killed, millions of people who were protesting, a lot of property damage, $2 billion worth of insured property damage, maybe another $2 billion of uninsured property damage. Why? Over the assumption that Officer Derek Chauvin did what he did because of George Floyd's race. The lead prosecutor in that case was a black man. I'm a trial lawyer, and your most important statement in the trial is your opening statement, most important part of it, where you set the whole narrative. And he took pains, it was on television, to say the police in general are not on trial. He said most of them are doing a good job. They have a tough job. They have to make a split-second decision, life or death. It's hard. He said the Minneapolis PD in general is not on trial. And he mentioned some of the officers and officials he knew. He said, this individual's on trial for what this individual did, and the black prosecutor never even intimated that what Derek Chauvin did had anything to do with George Floyd's race, and Derek Chauvin was never charged with a hate crime. Yet you had all these people out there destroying property because of this assumption that what happened to George Floyd had to do with his race. Now, I don't know about the political affiliation of the people that were protesting, but I assure you, they would probably self-describe, if you ask them, are you liberal or very liberal, they probably would say, yeah, I'm very liberal.
Yeah.
The reason I mention that is that there is a website called policemag.com. And they asked people who self-described as very liberal, how many unarmed black men did the police kill in 2019? 50% of the self-described very liberal people thought the police killed 1,000 unarmed black men in 2019. 8% thought they killed 10,000. As to people that self-describe as just liberal, 39% of them thought the police killed 1,000 unarmed black men in 2019. 5% thought they killed 10,000. The answer, according to the Washington Post database, 12.
12?
12.
Like 1, 2?
1, 2. That's the gap between what people think is going on and what is going on, which is why so many people are in the streets rioting, because they think this happens all the time when in fact it is rare. And just because you're unarmed does not mean you're not dangerous or reasonably perceived as dangerous. Michael Brown Ferguson was unarmed. He had just done a strong arm robbery, and his DNA was found on the officer's gun, meaning he was trying to get it.
Right.
So just because you're unarmed does not mean you're not dangerous. So there are very, very, very few instances of unarmed black people who are legitimately killed for unlawful reasons every year. There are more unarmed white people that are killed for unlawful reasons than there are blacks. It is rare for the police to kill anybody, let alone unarmed, let alone unlawfully. So you have all these people, young black men, who are told otherwise, pulled over by the cops. Instead of complying and cooperating, they're copying an attitude. And as a result, something is happening that otherwise wouldn't happen. My dad always told me, when you're pulled over by the cop, make sure your left hand is at 10 o'clock, your right hand is at 2 o'clock. Say yes, sir, say no, sir, say yes, ma'am, say no, ma'am. My dad wasn't a biologist, but he could tell a female cop from a male cop. Make sure your paperwork is in order. And if you feel you're mistreated, get a badge number, and both of us will go downtown and deal with it. Instead, black people are taught the opposite. You're taught cops are enemies, and they're out to get you. And as a result, they're not cooperating, and as a result, you're having far more violent encounters than would otherwise be the case.
What a mess.
So I'm saying all this, in my opinion, is Obama. When he could have said something conciliatory, when he could have said something reasonable, when he could have said, calm the blank down. It is not true. He went the opposite way. And as a result, in my opinion, he took the country in a way that made us far more divisive at each other's throat. After all, this bright, well-educated Harvard guy who grew up under the care of his white grandparents, thinks racism is a major problem in America, thinks America is bedeviled by systemic racism. If Obama feels that way, it must be true. And that's what he did.
It's only gotten worse since then. It has not gotten better. Why do you think that you named the black mayors of the cities and all the successful blacks?
Governors.
Why don't they tell black people the truth about things? Why don't they say, well, look, you can make it, here's how I made it. Why don't they tell the other black people?
I think some of them are just hustlers, like Al Sharpton. No, he's not elected official, but Al Sharpton's just a hustler. We all know he's full of it.
Like the mayor of Chicago, for example, right?
I just think he's an idiot. I just think he's just a very, very dumb person. I mean, how are you going to argue that the reason people are stealing is because of the lack of reparations? How are you going to make that argument?
Right. When you know better. I mean, you just know better. You're the mayor of the city.
We haven't had reparations. We haven't had reparations ever. All of a sudden, there's a spike in crime. It's because of the lack of reparations.
Why do you think they won't tell them the truth? Instead of saying it's the family, it's this and that.
Because they will be accused of blaming the victim, and they'll be accused of being a sellout.
And so, but do they care about that more than they care about helping the blacks?
I think part of it's power. I think that if Barack Obama were here and he heard what I just now said about him, if he were being honest, he wouldn't have disagreed with any of it. Why did he do it then? Why? Because he wanted to remain in power. The Democrats remain in power by convincing 90% of black people to vote for him. How do you do that? When they've destroyed the family, when they won't allow school choice. There are 13 public high schools in Baltimore, Jesse. 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. 0. Chicago, 53 government schools. 0% of the kids can do math at grade level.
Amazing.
Yet the party elites, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, they have their own kids in private school while denying school choice for other kids.
Amazing.
And the reason for that is because the largest funder of the Democrats is the teachers union, and they adamantly oppose school choice, while, by the way, having their own kids in private schools.
Oh,
there was a study some years ago. Nationwide, 10% of American families have their kids in private school. 6% of black families do. In Philadelphia, 49% of the public school teachers with school-age kids have their own kids in private school. In Chicago, it's 39%. Out here at LAUSD, where you and I are, it's 28%.
Yeah.
So the people that know the school system the best, teachers, aren't putting their own kids in it. What does that tell you?
So then, why don't the blacks, not all, but most, why don't they think for themselves? Like for me, when I moved out here and I started hearing about racism, because growing up in Alabama, I didn't hear about this stuff.
Right.
At some point, I started thinking for myself. I'm looking around at Jesse Jackson, all these people, they're doing well, their families are getting amazing, good jobs.
Right.
And I start to question things. Why don't most black people question what's happening?
I read your book, From Rage to Responsibility.
Yeah.
And you began to think for yourself.
Right.
A lot of black people just don't. They watch the same thing, they huddle around the same people, they complete each other's sentences, and so there's an echo chamber. In my book, As Goes California, Jesse,
amazing book, by the way.
Thank you.
And I'm black and I don't read a lot, but I went through it.
Well, wait for the movie. So when the campaign is over, I go to a restaurant on the west side of LA. LA is liberal, west side's even more liberal.
All right.
And I get there about 15 minutes before my buddy gets there. So I'm sitting there by myself, the table next to me, and these two elderly ladies, I think, felt sorry for me. So they start talking to me. And it turns out they're both 85 years old. They've known each other since the second grade. One of them was celebrating her birthday. They were Jewish. One said she was a human rights advocate, and the other one said she was a psychotherapist. And then about 10 minutes to the conversation, Jesse, one of them said, wait a minute. I know you. You're that guy that ran for governor in the recall election. You're that Larry Elder. And they smiled and said, guess who we voted for? I said, you didn't vote for me. I said, how do you know that? I said, well, let's see. We're on the west side of LA. You're both Jewish. One of you was a human rights activist. You didn't vote for me. And they both said you didn't. They didn't. I said, let me ask you something. How do you feel about the crime? And they both said that it had spiked in their neighborhoods. They knew people that had been mugged. How do you feel about the quality of our schools? And they both admitted they would never put their kid in a public school in LA. How do you feel about the fact that people are leaving California for the first time? 1 million people have left the state in the last 3 years. How do you feel about that? We have friends who've left. How do you feel about the way Gavin Newsom shut down the state in a more severe way than anybody else because of COVID? We've lost a third of all restaurants in California last few years. Almost all of them mom and pop operations run by black and brown people, the people that people like Gavin Newsom claim they care about.
Right.
How do you feel about all that? They all said it's outrageous. How do you feel about the homeless problem? They all said they had homeless encampments near their house. I said, so here we are completing each other's sentences, but you didn't vote for me. I said, have you ever had a conversation with a conservative Republican? And they both admitted they had not.
Had not.
Also in the book, I talk about this massage therapist. I have some issues with my back, which is why I take Relief Factor. That wasn't a plug. And a friend of mine told me about this really good therapist.
You had back problem?
Yeah.
Hey.
Your trainer's going to help me with that too.
Nice. Oh yeah.
So I get the address, and I'm assuming it's going to be in some office building. So I drive, and it's a residential neighborhood. And it's a house. So I knock on the door. Woman opens up the door. I get hit in the face with a big plume of marijuana smoke. Not that I would know what that smells like or anything. And she has tattoos everywhere. She has ear piercings everywhere. Her hair has 4 or 5 different colors. Probably not a conservative Republican.
Right.
So I walk in, she starts working on my back. And she's playing Motown music. And that's my favorite genre of popular music.
Yeah, mine too.
So a song would come on, My Girl. And I said, well, that was written by Smokey Robinson. And he wrote it for the lead singer of The Temptations. His name is David Ruffin, who died from a cocaine overdose. Then she played another song. This is a song written by Marvin Gaye. It's called What's Going On. And Berry Gordy, the head of Motown, did not want him to record that song because they had a factory where they had a songwriter and an arranger, and the singer just sang, but Marvin Gaye wanted to do his own thing. And so reluctantly, Berry Gordy allowed, so every song that came on, I had a story. And she said, about 20 minutes into the session, I know who you are. You're the guy that ran for governor. And when you called to make your appointment, I knew who you were then. I just didn't want to say anything because I don't agree with your politics. But had I known you were this funny and this personable, I would have voted for you.
Yeah.
I said, do you know any Republicans? She said, no. I said, well, we have personalities. We have senses of humor. You'd be shocked.
Yeah.
So look, my long way of answering your question, why is it that people are not challenging this? They're around the same people who say the same thing,
Yeah.
who don't challenge anything, who watch the same TV, who read the same newspapers if they read, and they're all echoing the same thoughts. We're oppressed. Republicans are bad guys. It's us against them. People who are wealthy exploited people who are not wealthy. That's the mindset. It's a Marxist mindset.
Yeah.
And by that, by Marxist, I mean this. Marx was the one that pushed the narrative that the world can be divided into two people, the oppressed and the oppressors. And that's how people on the left feel. That's how this woman at Harvard feels. That's how 85% of the Harvard faculty feels. That's what kids are learning right now. And it's destructive to the country.
Amazing.